Most people do not lose because they lack intelligence. They lose because they become dependent on being liked. Sit with that for a moment. Being liked feels comfortable. It feels safe. It even feels emotionally intelligent. But comfort has a price, and most people never realize what they sacrificed just to avoid tension. Every unnecessary apology, every softened opinion, every moment spent shrinking to protect someone else's perception slowly weakens the mind. The Stoics understood this clearly. A person who cannot tolerate disapproval eventually becomes controlled by it. And once approval begins controlling behavior, freedom disappears quietly, one compromise at a time. The strange part is that society rewards this behavior in the beginning. People praise the agreeable, the accommodating, the person who never creates discomfort. But beneath that politeness is often fear disguised as virtue. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of standing alone in a world obsessed with validation. Stoicism teaches something far more difficult. It teaches that peace is not found in pleasing everyone around you. Peace is found in mastering yourself, in remaining steady when emotions rise, in speaking carefully without needing applause, in understanding that calmness carries more power than performance ever will. That is why so many people slowly lose themselves without noticing it. They say yes when they want to say no. They explain simple decisions as if they are asking for permission. They become so focused on managing reactions that they stop listening to their own mind clearly. And over time, the need for acceptance becomes stronger than the need for truth. But the moment a person stops treating discomfort like danger, something begins to change internally. Reactions slow down, clarity returns, and for the first time in a long time, they stop performing for the world and start paying attention to who they are becoming beneath the noise. Most people spend years believing they are emotionally intelligent, when in reality they are emotionally reactive in socially acceptable ways. They think maturity means smoothing every disagreement before tension has time to settle. They think wisdom means remaining endlessly agreeable, endlessly available, endlessly easy to handle. So they enter conversations already adjusting themselves before a single word is exchanged. Their mind scans the room for resistance. Their tone shifts depending on who is listening. Gradually their thoughts stop coming from clarity and start coming from anticipation. After enough repetition, this behavior no longer feels exhausting because it becomes automatic. That is the danger of conditioning. A person can lose themselves slowly while believing they are simply becoming better at dealing with people. The Stoics saw this differently. They understood that discomfort is not always a signal to retreat. Sometimes discomfort is simply exposure to truth without distraction. The moment silence enters a conversation, most people rush to fill it because silence forces awareness. It removes performance. It removes momentum. Suddenly, every insecurity becomes visible internally. That is why people laugh too quickly after making a serious point. That is why they repeat explanations even after being understood the first time. They are not always speaking for clarity. Often they are speaking to escape tension. And the more someone fears tension, the easier they become to control emotionally. Pressure reveals patterns. A person who cannot tolerate emotional friction will eventually surrender principles just to restore temporary comfort. You can see this in ordinary moments. Someone receives mild criticism and immediately begins defending intentions nobody questioned. Someone notices disapproval on another person's face and suddenly softens every sentence that follows. Another apologizes simply because the atmosphere became slightly uncomfortable for a few seconds. None of these reactions appear dramatic from the outside, yet they reveal something important internally. Many people are not responding consciously. They are reacting instinctively to avoid emotional uncertainty. Their nervous system interprets tension as danger, even when no real threat exists. That is why composure has become rare. Genuine composure requires the ability to remain present without rushing to emotionally protect yourself from every uncomfortable moment. Calm individuals understand that not every silence requires rescue. Not every disagreement requires immediate resolution. Not every raised eyebrow deserves explanation. There is quiet strength in allowing moments to breathe without scrambling to control perception. And strangely enough, people often respect restraint more than excessive reassurance. When someone speaks carefully, pauses naturally, and remains steady under subtle pressure, the emotional atmosphere changes immediately. Others become more attentive. Words carry more weight. Presence becomes noticeable without effort. This happens because composure communicates internal order. It suggests that a person is thinking before reacting instead of reacting before thinking. That difference may appear small, but socially it changes everything. Most people never realize how much energy disappears into managing perception. Entire conversations become exercises in avoiding misunderstanding instead of communicating honestly. They over-explain harmless decisions. They dilute strong opinions before anyone even challenges them. They speak as if they are constantly preparing for emotional negotiation. Eventually, this creates a fractured identity because the individual stops speaking from conviction and starts speaking from prediction. Every sentence becomes shaped by anticipated reactions. The Stoics warned about this through their emphasis on self-command. A person who depends too heavily on external approval slowly loses inner direction. Their emotional state becomes tied to the moods, expressions, and judgments of others. That dependency creates instability, even when it hides beneath politeness. There is another layer beneath this that many people avoid confronting. Many forms of niceness are driven less by compassion and more by fear. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of standing alone after expressing an honest thought. This does not mean kindness is weakness. Real kindness requires discipline because it comes from choice rather than emotional dependency. But performative agreeableness usually comes from self-protection. People say yes because no creates anxiety. They avoid honesty because honesty creates tension. They become excessively accommodating because disapproval feels emotionally unbearable. Over time, this pattern destroys clarity. Resentment quietly builds underneath forced politeness, and eventually the individual no longer knows whether their behavior reflects genuine character or emotional survival. The moment someone stops treating discomfort as an emergency, something important begins to change internally. Reactions slow down, observation becomes easier, emotional pressure loses some of its control. Instead of rushing to fix every awkward moment, the mind learns to stay grounded long enough to understand what is actually happening. That is where self-possession begins. Not in domination, not in emotional coldness, in steadiness, in the ability to remain mentally clear while tension exists around you. People notice this immediately, even if they cannot explain why. A calm presence changes the emotional rhythm of every interaction because composure interrupts the cycle of unconscious reaction. And once a person no longer needs every conversation to feel emotionally safe, their words become cleaner, their silence becomes stronger, and their presence begins speaking before they do. That is why disciplined silence often feels more powerful than emotional performance. The person who can sit calmly inside uncertainty without immediately defending, explaining, or retreating develops a kind of psychological balance that cannot be imitated through rehearsed confidence. Their attention stays rooted in observation rather than approval. They are no longer trying to manage every emotional reaction around them. They are present, deliberate, internally stable. And that stability changes how every interaction unfolds. If this way of thinking resonates with you, consider subscribing. Not for noise or empty motivation, but for perspectives that strengthen clarity, discipline, and self-possession over time. Approval is one of the quietest addictions a person can develop because society rewards it constantly. The need to be accepted rarely announces itself loudly. It hides inside ordinary behavior. It appears in the hesitation before an honest opinion. It appears in the nervous smile after a serious statement. It appears in the instinct to soften truth so nobody feels uncomfortable. Most people are not guided by clarity as much as they are guided by anticipated reactions. Before they speak, their mind is already calculating emotional consequences. Will this create tension? Will this damage how I am perceived? Will this make someone withdraw approval from me? After enough repetition, the individual slowly stops expressing who they really are and starts performing the version that feels safest socially. The Stoics understood how dangerous this dependency could become. A person who relies on praise for emotional stability eventually becomes controlled by criticism. Once approval becomes necessary, honesty becomes conditional, standards become flexible, convictions become negotiable. Epictetus warned about this clearly when he said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." This is why social pressure changes people so easily. Someone may know exactly what they believe internally, yet the moment resistance appears, uncertainty takes over. They adjust their tone. They retreat from directness. They abandon clarity to restore harmony. Not because they are incapable of courage, but because rejection feels emotionally threatening to them. The desire for reassurance becomes stronger than the desire for truth. And when reassurance becomes addictive, judgment weakens without the person even realizing it. You can watch this happen in everyday conversations. Someone shares an opinion, notices slight disagreement, then immediately starts revising their own point to regain acceptance. Another person apologizes for being honest before anyone reacts negatively. Others remain silent completely, even when something inside them strongly disagrees with what is happening around them. Their nervous system prioritizes belonging over authenticity. That survival instinct may have protected people socially at one point, but carried too far it creates emotional fragility. A person who constantly seeks external validation loses the ability to stand calmly inside disapproval. They begin shaping their identity around reactions instead of principles. Eventually, they no longer know whether their decisions are truly theirs or simply adaptations designed to avoid criticism. This is why inner stability matters so deeply. Real composure begins the moment approval stops controlling behavior. Not when praise disappears completely, but when praise becomes optional rather than necessary. There is a major difference between appreciating acceptance and depending on it emotionally. The first leaves a person grounded. The second leaves them psychologically vulnerable. Calm individuals understand they cannot control how every person interprets them. They cannot guarantee universal agreement. They cannot avoid every misunderstanding. Once this becomes accepted internally, something shifts. The mind becomes quieter. Speech becomes cleaner, reactions become slower and more deliberate. Instead of desperately managing perception, the individual starts focusing on alignment between thought, action, and principle. That shift changes social presence in subtle but powerful ways. People trust those who appear emotionally settled within themselves. Not perfect, not arrogant, settled. There is something naturally convincing about a person who speaks honestly without anxiously searching faces for approval afterward. Their energy feels stable because it is not constantly adjusting itself to external reactions. Most individuals can sense insecurity quickly, even when insecurity hides beneath politeness or excessive friendliness. They can feel when someone is trying too hard to be liked. Ironically, that effort often creates less respect instead of more. Excessive approval seeking weakens presence because it communicates dependence. It silently tells others that emotional comfort matters more than conviction. This does not mean becoming emotionally distant or unnecessarily confrontational. Some people misunderstand detachment and turn it into performance. They become cold, rigid, and emotionally unavailable because they think indifference equals strength. But forced detachment is still a reaction. Real steadiness is quieter than that. It allows warmth without dependency. It allows kindness without self-abandonment. Stoic discipline was never about eliminating emotion. It was about refusing to become enslaved by emotional impulses. A grounded person can listen openly, disagree calmly, and remain respectful without surrendering personal clarity. That balance creates influence naturally because it reflects self-command rather than emotional instability. As this way of thinking develops, another realization begins to emerge. Many people spend their entire lives asking for invisible permission. Permission to speak honestly, permission to set boundaries, permission to take up space confidently without apologizing for it. Yet confidence built on permission is fragile because permission can always be withdrawn. The moment criticism arrives, the entire structure collapses. This is why external validation can never create lasting stability. Stability must come from internal alignment, from knowing what matters to you before entering the room, instead of discovering your values through the reactions of others. Once a person reaches that point, social pressure loses much of its influence. They no longer need constant reassurance to remain steady, and that quiet certainty changes every interaction around them. People often believe influence comes from speaking louder, reacting faster, or dominating every conversation. In reality, influence grows through consistency. The individual who remains calm when others become reactive slowly becomes the reference point in the room. That kind of presence cannot be manufactured through techniques alone, because people recognize authenticity. They notice when someone is performing confidence instead of living from conviction. This is why disciplined self-awareness matters more than appearance. A person who no longer depends on approval moves differently. Their decisions carry intention, their silence carries weight, and their words stop sounding like requests and start sounding like reflections of inner clarity consistently. Once approval loses its grip on the mind, another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Most people live in a constant state of reaction. They move quickly, speak quickly, answer quickly, defend quickly. The moment emotion appears, behavior follows immediately behind it. Someone sends a message with the wrong tone, and anxiety takes over before logic even enters the situation. A small criticism appears, and the mind instantly begins constructing defenses. A moment of disrespect occurs, and anger rushes forward before awareness has time to intervene. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." People call impulsive reaction authenticity because it feels honest in the moment. But immediate reaction is not always honesty. Very often it is conditioning. It is the nervous system trying to regain emotional control as fast as possible. The Stoics understood that true freedom begins in the space between what happens and how a person chooses to respond. Most people never develop that space because they surrender it too quickly. Their emotions dictate tempo. Their impulses decide timing. They believe confidence means immediate response, immediate certainty, immediate expression. Yet calm timing often reveals far greater discipline than rapid reaction ever could. A person who pauses before speaking communicates something powerful without needing to announce it. They show that emotion does not control their behavior automatically. They observe first, they assess first, then they decide. That sequence changes the entire emotional structure of an interaction because it interrupts unconscious momentum. You can feel this difference clearly during tense moments. Someone expects resistance from you, perhaps even an argument, but instead they receive stillness, not passive silence, controlled silence. The atmosphere changes immediately because most individuals are accustomed to predictable emotional reactions. They expect defensiveness after criticism. They expect justification after accusation. They expect emotional escalation after tension appears. When those expected patterns disappear, uncertainty enters the interaction, and uncertainty naturally shifts attention. People begin watching more carefully. they begin thinking more carefully. Composure changes the emotional rhythm of the room because calmness under pressure feels rare in a world addicted to reaction. There is something revealing about people who cannot tolerate delay. Watch how quickly most individuals reach for their phone after receiving a difficult message. Watch how urgently they feel compelled to answer criticism. Watch how uncomfortable they become when silence stretches slightly longer than expected. Beneath the urgency often sits emotional dependency. The mind fears losing control of perception, so it reacts immediately in an attempt to restore certainty, but urgency rarely improves clarity. In many situations, it weakens it. Quick reactions often expose insecurity because the individual appears emotionally governed by the moment rather than mentally anchored beyond it. Calm people understand that not every situation requires instant engagement. Some situations require observation first, distance first, reflection first. That shift in timing changes more than communication. It changes identity gradually. A person who stops reacting impulsively begins reclaiming authority over their own mind. They no longer feel dragged emotionally from one moment to another. Instead of constantly being pulled by external events, they begin moving with greater intention internally. The Stoics practiced this form of discipline repeatedly because they understood that emotional mastery is built through small moments, not dramatic declarations. A delayed response, a controlled breath, a pause before speaking. These seem insignificant individually, yet over time they reshape the nervous system itself. The mind learns that discomfort does not require immediate escape. Tension does not require immediate release. Emotion does not require immediate expression. People notice this change even when they cannot explain it directly. Someone who remains composed during pressure creates a very different emotional impression than someone who reacts impulsively. Calmness signals stability. Stability creates trust. This is why measured individuals often carry quiet influence without forcing attention toward themselves. Their restraint creates gravity naturally because others sense internal control beneath the surface. Meanwhile, emotional impulsiveness often creates unpredictability, and unpredictability rooted in uncontrolled reaction makes people cautious for the wrong reasons. They stop trusting consistency. They begin anticipating emotional volatility instead of clarity. This is why emotional discipline strengthens presence while impulsiveness slowly weakens it. There is also another side to this that many people misunderstand. Slowing down does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean allowing disrespect or avoiding difficult conversations. In many cases, calm timing creates stronger responses than emotional intensity ever could. A steady sentence delivered without visible agitation often carries more weight than an angry speech filled with uncontrolled emotion. The person who remains centered while others become reactive gradually shifts the balance of interaction without needing dominance. Their calmness forces others to confront themselves more directly because there is no emotional chaos distracting from the moment. And once people realize they cannot easily provoke you into losing control, they begin interacting with greater awareness around you consistently. One of the quietest ways people lose themselves is through the inability to set limits without guilt. They keep giving attention long after respect disappears. They keep offering patience long after patience stops creating anything meaningful. Modern culture often presents this as virtue. Endless availability becomes confused with kindness. Unlimited tolerance becomes confused with emotional maturity. People are taught that good individuals should always understand, always forgive, always remain accessible no matter how draining the situation becomes. But eventually something begins to fracture internally, not loudly, quietly. The person starts feeling exhausted around people they once cared deeply about. Conversations feel heavier than they should, support turns into obligation, and resentment slowly forms underneath forced generosity because the mind recognizes imbalance even when the mouth refuses to acknowledge it. Seneca warned about this when he wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Real discipline is not endless self-sacrifice. It is knowing when compassion becomes self-abandonment. You can see this pattern everywhere once you become aware of it. Someone repeatedly ignores boundaries, yet the other person keeps explaining, forgiving, and accommodating because confrontation feels uncomfortable. Another individual constantly takes emotional energy without offering support in return, but access remains unlimited because withdrawal feels too harsh emotionally. Gradually, the relationship loses balance. Respect weakens because endless tolerance removes consequence. People often treat unrestricted access casually because human nature rarely values what appears constantly available. This is why emotional discipline matters, not to punish others, but to protect internal order from unnecessary erosion. Calm people understand that boundaries are not emotional walls. They are filters. They determine where attention flows and where it stops. There is a major difference between kindness rooted in strength and kindness rooted in fear. Fear-based kindness usually avoids boundaries because it depends heavily on maintaining approval. The individual worries that saying no may create distance, disappointment, or conflict, so they continue sacrificing comfort to preserve emotional acceptance. On the surface, this behavior appears generous, yet internally it creates instability because the person is acting against their own awareness repeatedly. Strength-based kindness feels different. It remains compassionate without becoming self-destructive. It understands that care does not require endless access. Respect does not require constant availability. Sometimes the healthiest decision is quiet distance rather than endless emotional negotiation. And often the people who react most negatively to boundaries were benefiting most from their absence. What makes this difficult is that many individuals associate boundaries with aggression. They believe setting limits requires confrontation, emotional speeches, or dramatic separation. In reality, emotionally disciplined people often adjust access quietly. They stop overextending themselves. They reduce unnecessary engagement. They become more intentional with time and energy. No performance, no hostility, just awareness guiding behavior more carefully. This subtle restraint changes interactions naturally because people begin noticing that attention is no longer automatic. Presence becomes more valuable when it is intentional rather than endlessly available. Scarcity creates psychological weight because effort becomes connected to access. The moment someone realizes your attention must be earned rather than expected, behavior often changes immediately. There is another reason this matters deeply. A person who cannot protect emotional energy eventually loses clarity in every area of life. Constant emotional exhaustion weakens judgment. It shortens patience. It increases irritability beneath the surface. Many individuals believe they are overwhelmed by life itself, when in reality they are overwhelmed by unrestricted emotional access. Too many unnecessary conversations, too many draining interactions, too much emotional labor performed out of obligation instead of genuine alignment. The Stoics consistently emphasized self-command because they recognized that inner peace requires intentional management of external influence. A distracted mind becomes reactive. A depleted mind becomes emotionally unstable. Protection of energy is not selfishness. It is maintenance of psychological balance. As boundaries become stronger internally, something else begins to change externally. People start approaching differently. They become more mindful of how they speak, how they behave, how they use your time. Not because fear was created, but because standards became visible through consistent action. Most individuals adjust behavior based on what receives consequence and what receives unlimited tolerance. Endless accommodation teaches others that your limits are flexible. Calm consistency teaches the opposite. This is why emotionally grounded individuals rarely need dramatic confrontations repeatedly. Their behavior establishes expectation long before words become necessary. Presence itself communicates standards because actions remain aligned over time. Even after people learn how to create boundaries, many still remain emotionally trapped by one final habit: the constant need to explain themselves completely, the need to clarify every decision, justify every action, and resolve every misunderstanding before discomfort has time to settle. It often sounds reasonable on the surface because clarity appears responsible. People tell themselves they are simply communicating openly. But beneath excessive explanation, there is usually something deeper happening emotionally. The fear of being judged incorrectly, the fear of disappointing someone, the fear of losing approval because another person interpreted their actions negatively. And once that fear takes control, speech stops becoming intentional and starts becoming defensive. Words begin serving emotional protection instead of honest communication. This is why many conversations feel exhausting without obvious conflict ever appearing. A simple statement turns into a long explanation. A small disagreement becomes a detailed defense of character and intention. Someone asks a brief question and receives 10 minutes of emotional clarification in response. Most people do not realize how much insecurity leaks through over-explanation because the behavior feels socially acceptable. Yet calm individuals can sense it immediately. The energy behind the words feels unsettled. There is an urgency inside the communication itself, a hidden need to regain emotional certainty through reassurance. And ironically, the harder someone tries to control how they are perceived, the less grounded they begin to appear. Many people are uncomfortable with unresolved tension because unresolved tension forces them to sit with uncertainty. The mind wants immediate resolution, immediate reassurance, immediate emotional relief. That is why someone sends long messages after a conversation ends awkwardly. That is why they replay interactions repeatedly in their head, searching for better wording. That is why they continue explaining themselves even after the other person has already stopped listening emotionally. They believe closure will restore internal peace. Yet peace built on external understanding is fragile because understanding cannot be fully controlled. Real steadiness appears when a person no longer depends on perfect perception to remain emotionally settled within themselves. There is a quiet strength in saying only what needs to be said and then allowing silence to exist afterward. Most individuals underestimate how much weight restraint can carry. A concise answer delivered calmly often feels stronger than a long emotional defense because restraint communicates confidence internally. It shows that the person is not panicking emotionally beneath the conversation. They are not scrambling to repair every possibility of misunderstanding. They are grounded enough to let their words stand on their own. Epictetus expressed this simply: "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." This does not mean becoming vague or emotionally unavailable. It means removing unnecessary emotional overflow from communication. The more disciplined speech becomes, the more impact it tends to carry naturally. You can notice this difference clearly in people who remain composed during disagreement. One person rushes to explain motives repeatedly, trying to make sure they are seen positively from every possible angle. Another person listens carefully, responds briefly, and allows the interaction to settle without excessive defense. The second presence usually feels calmer and more stable because their emotional state is not fully dependent on controlling perception. They trust themselves enough to tolerate temporary misunderstanding. That tolerance creates psychological steadiness because emotional energy is no longer consumed by constant reputation management. Instead of trying to force clarity emotionally, they allow time and consistency to shape perception naturally. This is where many people confuse restraint with manipulation. They assume that saying less is some form of strategy designed to create mystery artificially, but genuine restraint is not performance, it is emotional control. There is a major difference between intentionally hiding yourself and simply refusing to overexpose every thought impulsively. Calm people understand that constant self-disclosure weakens emotional presence because nothing remains grounded internally. Every insecurity becomes externalized immediately. Every fear becomes verbalized instantly. Every discomfort becomes explained before it can even be understood clearly. Over time, this creates emotional noise. The individual loses the ability to sit quietly with their own thoughts without needing external reassurance to stabilize them. The Stoics practiced restraint because they valued inner order more than emotional reaction. They understood that disciplined speech protects clarity. Words spoken impulsively often create consequences that silence never would have created. This is why emotionally grounded individuals pause before speaking unnecessarily. They observe before explaining. They think before reacting. And slowly, their presence begins carrying a different kind of weight. People listen more carefully because the words are intentional instead of excessive. Silence becomes part of communication rather than something feared emotionally. And when silence stops feeling threatening internally, interactions become calmer, cleaner, and more powerful without force. Eventually, a person begins realizing that not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Not every opinion deserves response. Not every uncomfortable interaction requires emotional resolution before moving forward. That realization changes behavior deeply because emotional energy stops leaking through unnecessary explanation. The mind becomes less desperate to control how every person feels about them. And once that desperation disappears, communication transforms naturally. Speech becomes more measured, reactions become more stable, presence becomes quieter but stronger at the same time. Because disciplined words carry gravity, precisely because they are not being used to chase emotional safety constantly anymore. Once awareness begins sharpening internally, conversations stop feeling random. Patterns become visible everywhere. Small reactions start revealing much larger truths about people. The way someone responds to silence. The way someone reacts when they are interrupted. The way someone changes their tone around authority, attention, or disapproval. Most individuals move through social situations unconsciously, focused only on the surface-level exchange of words, but underneath every interaction, there is another layer unfolding quietly. Emotional positioning is constantly shifting. Energy is constantly being exchanged. And the people who understand this rarely need to dominate conversations loudly because they recognize that influence is usually established through subtler behavior. Watch carefully and something becomes obvious. The person who constantly seeks reassurance almost always gives away emotional leverage first. They explain too much, they adjust too quickly, they work harder than everyone else to maintain emotional comfort inside the interaction. Over time, this creates imbalance because effort itself communicates positioning. The one investing excessive emotional energy often becomes psychologically dependent on the outcome of the conversation. Meanwhile, the calmer individual remains centered regardless of how the interaction unfolds. That emotional steadiness changes perception naturally. People trust composure because composure suggests internal stability, not perfection. Stability. And stability affects every social dynamic more deeply than most realize. The Stoics valued observation because observation creates distance between awareness and impulse. The moment emotion stops controlling perception completely, clarity increases. You begin noticing behaviors that once seemed invisible. One person interrupts constantly because they need control emotionally. Another apologizes before speaking because they fear taking up space. Someone laughs after every serious sentence because tension makes them uncomfortable internally. Another person keeps over-explaining small details because silence creates anxiety. None of these behaviors appear dramatic on the surface, yet together they reveal emotional structure beneath personality. This is why awareness matters. The more consciously you observe interactions, the less likely you are to become emotionally pulled into unconscious patterns yourself. Most people underestimate how much influence is shaped through consistency rather than force. Loud dominance attracts attention temporarily, but steady presence shapes long-term perception more effectively. A person who remains calm during disagreement slowly becomes emotionally difficult to move. Others begin adjusting around them naturally because their reactions remain measured instead of impulsive. This is one reason emotionally reactive individuals often struggle to maintain influence consistently. Their behavior changes too much depending on mood, pressure, or approval. Stability disappears, and without stability, trust weakens over time. People may respond to emotional intensity in the moment, but internally they remain cautious around unpredictability. Calm consistency creates a very different emotional atmosphere. You can feel this difference in conversations where one person desperately tries to be understood while the other remains internally settled regardless of agreement. The first individual often speaks more, yet carries less psychological weight because their emotional state appears tied to acceptance. The second individual may say less, but their words land differently because they are not speaking from emotional urgency. They are speaking from clarity. This distinction matters deeply because communication is shaped as much by emotional energy as by language itself. People respond not only to words, but to the emotional condition beneath those words. Calmness creates trust. Desperation creates tension. And over time, these emotional signals quietly shape social hierarchy without most people ever consciously noticing it. As awareness develops further, effort imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. One person constantly initiates contact, keeps conversations alive, reassures repeatedly, and adapts endlessly just to maintain connection. Another person contributes little while receiving enormous emotional investment in return. This imbalance exists in friendships, relationships, workplaces, and even families. Yet many individuals continue participating in these dynamics unconsciously because they fear losing connection if they stop overextending themselves emotionally. The problem is that excessive emotional effort often lowers perceived value instead of increasing it. Human nature tends to respect what appears grounded, not what appears desperate to be accepted. This is why restraint matters, not as manipulation, but as self-respect expressed through behavior. Stoic discipline strengthens this awareness because it trains the mind to observe before reacting emotionally. Instead of entering every conversation seeking approval, reassurance, or emotional certainty, the individual begins observing balance itself. Who listens carefully and who only waits to speak? Who respects boundaries and who constantly tests them? Who remains composed and who becomes reactive the moment tension appears? These observations create clarity because they reveal where emotional energy should and should not be invested. Calm people become selective naturally, not out of arrogance, but out of understanding. Attention shapes emotional life, and once someone recognizes this fully, they stop distributing attention carelessly. This shift changes relationships quietly but significantly. A person who once entered interactions emotionally unguarded begins moving with greater awareness. They stop trying to rescue every conversation emotionally. They stop over-correcting tension unnecessarily. They stop chasing understanding from people unwilling to offer it sincerely. Instead of reacting impulsively to every emotional signal, they remain more centered within themselves. That steadiness changes how others behave around them because unconscious patterns no longer receive automatic participation. Emotional manipulation loses effectiveness when reactions become intentional rather than predictable. There is enormous power in becoming difficult to emotionally control. Not because control over others becomes the goal, but because inner stability prevents external behavior from constantly dictating your state of mind. Most manipulation succeeds through emotional urgency. Pressure someone emotionally enough, and they often abandon clarity just to restore comfort. But people who remain grounded under pressure interrupt that cycle. They create space between stimulus and reaction consistently. That space protects judgment, it protects identity, and eventually it changes presence itself. Others begin sensing that emotional chaos no longer easily pulls you away from yourself. And once that becomes visible consistently, interactions begin unfolding very differently around you naturally. Eventually, all of these patterns lead to one final understanding that changes the way a person moves through the world. Reputation is being built constantly, even during moments that feel insignificant. Every reaction teaches people what to expect from you. Every emotional impulse repeated often enough becomes part of your identity in the minds of others. Most individuals think reputation is shaped through major achievements or dramatic moments, yet perception usually forms through repetition instead. Through ordinary interactions, through emotional habits, through the small behaviors people witness again and again over time. This is why some individuals walk into a room and immediately receive respect without demanding it, while others continuously struggle to be taken seriously no matter how hard they try. The difference is rarely appearance alone. It is emotional consistency accumulated across countless moments. The Stoics believed character becomes most visible under pressure because pressure removes performance. Anyone can appear calm when circumstances are comfortable. Anyone can appear disciplined when nothing challenges them emotionally. But tension exposes patterns quickly. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The true man is revealed in difficult times." A person who loses control whenever frustration appears eventually becomes known for instability. Someone who constantly seeks approval becomes associated with uncertainty. Another individual who consistently remains grounded during discomfort gradually creates a different impression entirely. People begin expecting steadiness from them, and expectation shapes social behavior more powerfully than most realize. Once others associate you with emotional discipline, interactions begin changing before conversations even start. Most people never consciously design the reputation they are creating. They move emotionally from moment to moment without considering what their repeated reactions communicate over time. A single emotional outburst may seem temporary, but repeated enough, it becomes part of how others perceive your nature. The same applies to boundaries. If disrespect is tolerated consistently, people slowly assume access has no real limits. If standards disappear whenever pressure appears, others begin expecting flexibility rather than firmness. Human beings learn how to treat one another largely through patterns, not speeches, not intentions, patterns. This is why disciplined behavior matters more than temporary performance. Consistency teaches people what your presence represents. You can see this clearly in people who naturally command quiet respect. Often they are not the loudest individuals in the room. They are not constantly demanding attention or trying to dominate every interaction. What separates them is predictability of character. They respond calmly under stress. They do not overreact emotionally to minor tension. Their words remain measured even during disagreement. Over time, others stop testing them unnecessarily because their standards have become visible through repeated behavior. This creates a subtle form of influence that feels almost effortless externally, yet it was built slowly through disciplined repetition internally. There is an important distinction here that many people misunderstand. Reputation is not about creating a false image. It is not about performing confidence artificially or manipulating perception through calculated behavior. Eventually, performance collapses because inconsistency exposes it. Real influence grows when external behavior aligns naturally with internal discipline. The individual is not pretending to be grounded. They have trained themselves to remain grounded repeatedly. They are not pretending to value boundaries. Their actions consistently reinforce those boundaries over time. This is why authenticity carries psychological weight. People sense congruence. They notice when someone's reactions remain stable, regardless of pressure, approval, or discomfort. That steadiness creates trust because it removes uncertainty from the interaction. As emotional discipline strengthens, another change begins happening quietly. The individual stops feeling the need to constantly prove themselves. Many people spend years trying to force respect through explanation, validation seeking, emotional intensity, or endless self-presentation. But genuine respect rarely grows through force. It develops gradually when behavior becomes internally consistent enough that others begin adjusting automatically. Calm standards create invisible structure around a person. Others begin recognizing what behavior receives access and what behavior creates distance. No dramatic confrontation is necessary because the pattern itself becomes clear. This is one reason emotionally grounded individuals often appear naturally authoritative without trying to appear dominant. The opposite is also true. Emotional inconsistency weakens perception over time, even if someone possesses intelligence, talent, or good intentions. A person who reacts impulsively one day and calmly the next creates uncertainty. Another who constantly changes standards depending on approval creates confusion. People stop trusting emotional reliability because the behavior feels unstable, and instability affects influence deeply. Human beings are drawn toward emotional steadiness because steadiness creates psychological safety. This is why composure carries such quiet power socially. It signals that circumstances do not completely control the individual internally. Their behavior remains intentional rather than purely reactive. Over time, disciplined presence begins shaping environments before words are even exchanged. People become more careful with disrespect, more aware of boundaries, more attentive during conversation, not because fear was created, but because emotional patterns established expectation clearly. The individual no longer needs to explain standards constantly because those standards are already reflected consistently through behavior. This is what many people misunderstand about influence. Real influence often becomes quieter as it grows stronger. Less force is required because perception has already been shaped through repetition. Others anticipate the response before the situation even develops fully. Eventually, reputation stops feeling like something external and starts becoming a reflection of internal order. The person is no longer acting disciplined occasionally. Discipline has become integrated into identity itself. Calmness becomes natural instead of performed. Boundaries become instinctive instead of rehearsed. Emotional steadiness becomes recognizable before a single sentence is spoken. And once this level of consistency develops, social dynamics begin shifting almost automatically. People test less, pressure less, and dismiss less, because behavior has already communicated what kind of treatment will and will not be accepted. That is why truly grounded individuals rarely need to announce their strength. Their presence teaches it long before words ever attempt to explain it. In the end, the strongest people are not the loudest, the coldest, or the most feared. They are the ones who remain steady when emotions try to pull them away from themselves. The ones who no longer need constant approval to feel secure. The ones who can sit in silence, hold their ground calmly, and move through life without abandoning their principles just to be accepted. That kind of strength is quiet, but it changes everything. If this message stayed with you, take a moment and watch one of the videos on your screen right now. Keep building the mindset that protects your peace, sharpens your discipline, and strengthens your presence.